My name is Claire Donovan. I am 38 years old. And while I was unconscious on an operating table fighting to keep my left kidney, my in-laws were 20 minutes away in a lawyer's office removing my name from a $2.3 million family will. I didn't find out from my husband. I didn't find out from the lawyer. I found out from a nurse named Patricia Owens, 58 years old, 31 years in surgical recovery, who had held my hand when I came out of anesthesia and remembered everything she overheard in that waiting room. But here is the part that still makes my hands shake. Patricia didn't come to me. She came to my daughter. Because my daughter was the one who had been asking the right questions for 3 months, and my daughter was only 16 years old. Welcome to Calm Drama Stories. If you are new here, subscribe and stay close, because this story does not end in a waiting room, it ends in a courtroom. I should tell you who I was before I became someone's mistake. I grew up in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, middle child of 5. My father, Raymond, drove a delivery truck for 22 years. My mother, Ellen, kept the books for a small hardware store on Chestnut Street and made sure every one of us knew how to read a bank statement before we turned 15. She used to say, "Numbers don't lie, Claire. People do, but numbers never do." I became a registered nurse at 24. Not because it was easy, because I understood what it meant to sit with someone in the worst moment of their life and make them feel less alone. I worked pediatric oncology for 6 years. After that, I moved to surgical recovery. 12-hour shifts, cold coffee, and the particular silence of a room where people wake up, confused and frightened, and reach for the first hand they can find. That was my hand. For 14 years. I met Daniel Whitmore at a hospital fundraiser in the fall of 2009. He was tall, quiet, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke. He worked in commercial real estate. His family, the Whitmore family, had been in construction and property development in central Pennsylvania for 3 generations. His father, Gerald, 71, built the company. His mother, Sylvia, 68, ran the family the way my mother ran the books. With precision, with authority, and with absolute certainty that her version of things was the only version that mattered. Daniel had 1 sister. Renee, 42, divorced, no children, lived 20 minutes from the family estate and had dinner with Gerald and Sylvia every Sunday without exception. I should have understood what that meant earlier than I did. Daniel and I married in 2011. Small ceremony. His parents smiled in the photographs and said the right things in the right order. Sylvia hugged me at the reception and said, "We are so glad he found someone stable." Stable. Not wonderful. Not perfect for him. Stable. Like I was a piece of furniture that wouldn't tip over. Our daughter, Megan, was born in 2012. She had Daniel's eyes and my mother's stubbornness, and from the time she could speak in full sentences, she asked questions that made adults uncomfortable. "Why does Grandma Sylvia always whisper when you leave the room, Mom? Why does Dad look at the floor when Grandpa Gerald talks about the company?" I told her she had an overactive imagination. She did not. For the first 8 years of our marriage, I believed I was part of the Whitmore family. Not fully, not warmly, but genuinely. Gerald shook my hand at Christmas. Sylvia sent birthday cards that were signed with love, even if the handwriting felt mechanical. Renee tolerated me the way you tolerate a noise you can't locate. Politely, distantly, with a smile that never reached her eyes. Daniel had been named in the family will since he turned 30. I knew this because he told me the night of his father's 75th birthday dinner. Gerald had updated the estate documents. The Whitmore family holdings, the property portfolio, the company shares, the trust. Daniel and Renee would split everything equally. And because Daniel and I were married, my name was included as a secondary beneficiary. I remember thinking it was just paperwork. I was a nurse. I didn't marry Daniel for property portfolios. I married him because he was the first man who ever asked me what I was afraid of, and then sat quietly while I answered. I should have read the paperwork more carefully. In January of last year, I was diagnosed with a kidney condition that had been progressing silently for 2 years. My left kidney was failing. The surgeon, Dr. Anand Mehta, recommended a partial nephrectomy. Remove the damaged section, preserve function, manage recovery over 6 to 8 weeks. It was serious. It was not life-threatening if handled correctly. I was scared the way nurses are scared, which is quietly and with full knowledge of every possible complication. The surgery was scheduled for March 14th, a Thursday morning, 7:30 a.m. My daughter Megan took the day off school to be at the hospital. Daniel said he would be there by 9. He was not there by 9. I came out of anesthesia at 11:40. The first thing I saw was the ceiling. The second thing I saw was Patricia Owens standing at the end of my bed checking my chart, the same way I had stood at the end of 1,000 beds checking 1,000 charts. She smiled when she saw me open my eyes. "There she is," she said. "You did great." I asked her where my husband was. She paused. Just a half second. The kind of pause that nurses are trained never to show, but I was a nurse. I caught it. "He stepped out a little while ago," she said. "I'll let him know you're awake." He came in 20 minutes later, kissed my forehead, held my hand, said all the right things. I was too tired and too medicated to notice that his eyes were doing something they had never done before in 15 years of marriage. They were avoiding mine. Recovery was 6 weeks at home. Megan took on more than a 16-year-old should. She cooked. She managed my medication schedule on a handwritten chart she taped to the refrigerator. She drove me to follow-up appointments on her learner's permit with Daniel in the passenger seat, pretending to be calm. She also started asking different questions. "Not to me. To Daniel. Dad, why did you miss Mom's surgery?" "I didn't miss it. I was there." "You were there after. Where were you during?" Daniel said he had a work call that ran long, an unavoidable client situation. He was sorry. Megan wrote it down, in a notebook. A small green spiral notebook she kept in her backpack. I didn't know about the notebook until later, much later. 6 weeks after my surgery, Patricia Owens called my personal cell phone. I had given her my number years ago, the way hospital colleagues do. We were not close friends. We were the kind of people who understood each other's work without needing to explain it. She asked if she could meet me for coffee. We met at a diner on Route 30. She came with a brown envelope. She set it on the table between us and folded her hands over it the way you fold your hands over something you've been carrying for a long time and are relieved to finally put down. "I have to tell you something," she said. "And I need you to understand that I am not telling you to cause trouble. I am telling you because if it were me, I would want to know." I nodded. She told me what happened on March 14th. Daniel had arrived at the hospital at 7:15. He checked me in, walked with me to pre-op, held my hand until the anesthesiologist came. That part was true. That part I remembered. What I did not know was what happened at 8:40. Patricia had been rotating between recovery and the surgical family waiting room that morning, standard protocol for long procedures. At 8:40, she saw Daniel in the waiting room on his phone. He was not on a work call. He was in a conversation, quiet but tense, that ended with him standing up, collecting his jacket, and walking toward the exit. He stopped at the door, turned back, said to Patricia, "Tell her I had to step out. Family thing. I'll be back." He was gone for 3 hours and 12 minutes. Patricia noted the time because it was her job to note things. At 12:15, a different nurse in surgical recovery overheard something in the hallway outside my room. Gerald and Sylvia Whitmore had come to the hospital. Not to see me. They arrived, spoke briefly with Daniel in the corridor, and left within 20 minutes without entering my room. Sylvia was heard to say, "It's handled. Renee signed this morning." Patricia had connected the pieces slowly, over weeks the way careful people do. She had a friend who worked at an estate law firm in Harrisburg, not Daniel's family's firm, a different one. She asked a careful question over lunch one day about whether will modifications required all parties to be present. They did not. A secondary beneficiary could be removed without their knowledge or signature. All it required was the primary beneficiary's consent. I sat in that diner booth and felt something I had no name for. Not anger, not grief, something colder. The feeling of a number that does not add up and finally does. I paid for the coffee. I drove home. I sat in my car in the driveway for 11 minutes. Then I called my mother. She picked up on the second ring. I told her what Patricia had told me. There was a silence on the line. Then my mother said, "Claire, listen to me carefully. You are a nurse. You know what documentation means. Start there." My mother's voice was the same voice she used when she taught me to read a bank statement at 14. Numbers don't lie, Claire. People do. I did not confront Daniel that night. I did not cry. I did not ask questions I wasn't ready to hear answered. I opened my laptop at the kitchen table after Megan went to bed, and I started the same way I start any problem that matters, from the beginning. Daniel and I had a joint financial account and separate personal accounts. I had full visibility into our joint account and had managed our household finances since 2013 because Daniel, for all his intelligence, did not enjoy spreadsheets. I pulled 12 months of statements. The pattern took 40 minutes to find. Every third month, a transfer from our joint account. Not large, never large enough to trigger a conversation. Between $800 and $1,200 each time, going to an account I did not recognize. I had never seen that account number in 4 years of managing our finances. I labeled the file. I saved it to a drive. I made 2 copies. Then I sat back and thought about Sylvia Whitmore saying it's handled in a hospital corridor while I was unconscious 20 feet away. If you have ever been betrayed by someone who was supposed to protect you, then you know that the worst moment is not finding out. The worst moment is the 3 seconds before you decide what to do next. Because in those 3 seconds, you are still the person you were before. And after them, you never will be again. I chose to know everything before I moved. Stay with me, because this story is just getting started. I called a family law attorney named Susan Falk the next morning from my car in the hospital parking lot before my shift. I had researched her the night before. 15 years in estate and family law, former prosecutor, reviewed on 3 separate legal directories as someone who did not lose cases she believed in. I told her what I knew: the will modification, the timeline, the financial transfers. Patricia's account of March 14th. Susan listened without interrupting. Then she said, "Do you have documentation?" I told her I had a spreadsheet, a witness, and a nurse's memory. She said, "Get me a copy of the will modification. Everything else we can build around." Megan found me at the kitchen table that night with the laptop open and the green spiral notebook in her hand. I didn't know she had been keeping notes. She opened it and set it in front of me. 3 months of entries. Dates, times, observations. Dad came home late, smelled like Grandma Sylvia's house, said he was at a client dinner. 2 weeks later, Dad and Grandpa Gerald on the phone for 40 minutes. Dad went into the garage, closed the door. The entry from March 14th read, Dad left surgery waiting room 8:40 a.m., back 11:52 a.m., didn't go into Mom's room for 20 minutes after he got back. My 16-year-old daughter had been doing what I taught her to do without ever knowing I was teaching her. She had been keeping receipts. I closed the notebook carefully. I looked at her across the kitchen table. "How long?" I asked. "Since November," she said. Something felt wrong. I didn't know what, so I wrote it down. She had her grandmother's instincts and my training and her father's eyes, and in that moment she was the clearest thing in the room. "I'm going to handle this," I told her. She nodded. "I know. That's why I'm giving you the notebook." Susan Falk obtained a copy of the will modification through a formal estate disclosure request filed on my behalf. It had been executed on March 14th at 9:15 in the morning. While I was in surgery, Daniel's signature was on page 4. Gerald and Sylvia as witnesses. Renee as the co-beneficiary who absorbed my removed share. The attorney who notarized it was named Howard Breck. He had handled Whitmore family legal matters for 11 years. The modification was legal, procedurally clean, deliberately timed. Susan set the document on her desk and looked at me. "They chose the one morning they knew you couldn't object," she said. "Yes," I said. "That tells me something about what they thought of you." "It tells me something about what they were afraid of," I said. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "I think I'm going to enjoy working with you." The financial transfers were traced within 2 weeks. The account belonged to a property management LLC registered in Renee's name. The transfers from our joint account, Daniel's contributions, had been funding maintenance costs on a property held in the Whitmore family trust, a property that Daniel had quietly been promised in the revised will. He had been paying into his own inheritance using our shared money without telling me. Not illegal. In a marriage with combined finances, the threshold for financial misconduct is specific. But Susan noted it carefully for the asset division calculation. Every dollar documented, every transfer labeled. My mother would have approved. I served Daniel with divorce papers on a Tuesday morning in May. I waited until Megan had left for school. I set the envelope on the kitchen table next to his coffee. I sat across from him and watched him open it. He read the first page. Then he looked up at me. "Claire, don't," I said. "Not yet." He closed the envelope. He sat very still. "The will," he said finally. "March 14th, I said. 9:15 in the morning. He didn't deny it. That was the thing. After everything, he didn't try to tell me I was wrong. He said, "My father said it was the right time to restructure. Your father said it was the right time because I was unconscious and couldn't argue." He looked at the table. "Were you ever going to tell me?" I asked. He was quiet for a long time. "I don't know," he said. That was the most honest thing he had said to me in months, and it was the last real conversation we had. The divorce was finalized 9 months later. Susan argued successfully that the joint financial contributions to the Whitmore family LLC constituted marital asset dissipation. The settlement recovered 3 years of those transfers in full, plus my legal fees. Gerald Whitmore's attorney tried twice to challenge Patricia's testimony. Patricia came to both depositions with her original nursing notes from March 14th, time-stamped, signed, filed in the hospital system the same day. 31 years of documentation habits. They stopped challenging her after the second deposition. Megan stayed with me. Her choice, stated clearly to the family court mediator without prompting. She was 17 by then, old enough in Pennsylvania to make that decision on her own. She still has the green spiral notebook. She said she's keeping it. Not out of bitterness. She said, because someday if something unfair happens to me, I want to remember that I already know how to handle it. She learned that from watching me. I learned it from my mother. My mother learned it from years of keeping books for a hardware store on Chestnut Street, where the numbers always had to match at the end of the day. Gerald Whitmore turned 73 last month. Sylvia sent Megan a birthday card in September. Megan read it, set it on the counter, and said, "She spelled my name wrong. She spelled it wrong for 17 years. I didn't add it to any binder. Some things don't need to be filed. They just need to be seen clearly." Patricia Owens retired last spring after 32 years in surgical recovery. At her going-away party, someone asked her what the most important thing she had learned in 3 decades of nursing was. She said, "Pay attention to the pauses. What people don't say is usually more important than what they do." She sent me a card after the divorce was finalized. 4 words inside. "You did great, Claire." The same thing she said when I woke up from surgery. The first time, she meant I survived the operating table. The second time, she meant something bigger. And both times, she was right. Thank you for watching Calm Drama Stories. If this story stayed with you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because somewhere out there, someone is sitting in a diner booth with a brown envelope on the table. And they need to know that paying attention, documenting carefully, and trusting the right people is always enough. Always.